All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Chloe, Nanny, the sound of laughter is what did it. It was too loud, too forced, a brittle shell over the quiet tension that had been growing in our apartment for months. I stood in the doorway of our cramped New York kitchen, watching Daniel's broad back as he carved the turkey. The familiar sight of him, my construction worker husband with hands that could gently cradle our cat or swing a sledgehammer with equal ease, should have been a comfort. But it wasn't. It was a lie, and I was standing in the middle of it, holding a bowl of cold cranberry sauce that felt like a lead weight in my hands. Thanksgiving. The word echoed in my head, empty of meaning. We were supposed to be at his mother's in Queens, but he'd insisted on a quiet, just us holiday this year. A romantic gesture, he'd said. Now I saw it for what it was, a control measure. No prying eyes, no questions about why he'd been working so many late nights, why he'd started using a new, cloyingly sweet cologne, why the man who used to leave his phone charging on the kitchen counter now kept it glued to his hip, screen facing down. Need a refill, babe? Daniel's voice was a little too cheerful as he turned, holding the carving knife. His smile didn't reach his eyes. They darted past me, towards the living room where his phone lay on the coffee table, next to the half-empty bottle of bourbon. I'm good, I said, my own voice sounding distant. I moved past him, the scent of roasted turkey and his new cologne making my stomach turn. I set the bowl down on the table, my gaze fixed on the phone. It was an old habit, this hyper-awareness. As a nanny, you learn to read the subtlest shifts in a room, the unspoken tensions in a family. I'd been reading the tension in my own marriage for weeks, but I'd chalked it up to stress, to the physical toll of his job, to my own frustration at caring for other people's children, while we remained a family of two. I walked into the living room, pretending to straighten a throw pillow. The phone lit up with a notification, a text message. The preview was short, but it was enough. Unknown number, can't stop thinking about last night. Happy Thanksgiving, the message truncated. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it plummeted, a stone falling through ice-cold water. My what? My love, my darling, the air left my lungs, last night. He'd said he was at a mandatory safety meeting. I'd believed him, I'd even packed him an extra sandwich. Everything okay, Chloe? Daniel was behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. I turned, my body moving on autopilot. I reached for his phone, my fingers brushing the cold glass. Just saw a text, might be important. It happened in a fraction of a second. A flinch, a violent, involuntary recoil. He didn't just pull the phone away. His entire body jerked back as if my touch had burned him. The genial mask he'd worn all day shattered, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. Time stopped. The Macy's parade played silently on the TV, a blur of colorful balloons. The smell of turkey became nauseating. In that single, microscopic gesture, that flinch, I saw everything. The late nights, the new cologne, the password on his laptop, the receipt I'd found for a fancy Italian restaurant I'd never been to. It all crystallized into one horrifying truth. My hand hung in the air between us. I looked from his panicked eyes to the phone he now clutched to his chest like a lifeline. The silence in the room was heavier than any I'd ever known, thick with the unsaid. Who is she, Daniel? The question came out quiet, steady. It surprised me. I felt like I was watching myself from a great distance. Chloe, don't be ridiculous, it's just work. His voice was tight, the lie clumsy and obvious. You flinched, I said, my voice still eerily calm. You flinched when I touched your phone. I took a step forward. You're having an affair. The denial was on his lips, but it died before it was born. He saw the certainty in my eyes. The mask fell completely, and the man standing before me was a stranger. Resentful. Exposed. The charade was over. The Thanksgiving dinner sat uneaten on the table, a perfect, grotesque monument to our broken life. The discovery wasn't a scream or a dramatic confrontation. It was a flinch. A silent, seismic shift in the foundation of everything I thought was real. And in the deafening quiet that followed, I felt the first icy trickle of a grief so vast, I knew it would change me forever. The silence after the flinch was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. It stretched between us, punctuated only by the tinny laughter from the muted television. Daniel's face cycled through emotions, panic, guilt, and then a stubborn defiance that was somehow worse than the initial shock. "It's not what you think," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. He still held the phone against his chest. "What do I think, Daniel?" My voice was a whisper, scraped raw from the inside. "I think you're having an affair. I saw the text. Can't stop thinking about last night." "Who were you with last night?" "Because it wasn't me, and it wasn't a safety meeting." He looked away, his jaw tightening. The man who could lift heavy beams and frame entire walls with his bare hands seemed suddenly fragile, unable to bear the weight of my gaze. "It's complicated, Chloe." "Complicated?" The word felt like a foreign object in my mouth. "We've been married for 8 years. We live in a 700-square-foot apartment. My life is scheduling naps and pureeing vegetables for other people's children. What's complicated is explaining to a 3-year-old why we can't have cookies for breakfast. This is simple. You broke your promise." I walked past him, back into the kitchen. The turkey, golden brown and perfect, sat in the center of the table. The smell, once comforting, now made me want to vomit. I started clearing the plates, my movements mechanical. I couldn't look at the food. I couldn't look at him. "Her name is Jessica," he said from the doorway. The admission hung in the air, stark and brutal. "She's an architect on the new high-rise downtown." I didn't turn around. I focused on the plate in my hand, the delicate floral pattern we'd chosen together at a flea market. "How long?" A long pause. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of me worrying about his stress levels, massaging his shoulders after work, believing his excuses. I thought of all the nights I'd spent alone in this apartment, watching sitcoms and waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. I'd built a narrative of a hardworking, devoted husband, and he'd been building a secret life with another woman. "Is it serious?" I asked, my back still to him. "I don't know." His voice was tired. "It just happened. We have a connection. She understands the pressure I'm under." That was the knife twist. "And I don't. I understand you come home covered in drywall dust and too tired to speak. I understand the worry when a project is behind schedule. I've been understanding for 8 years, Daniel. What did I not understand?" "It's not like that," he protested, but the words were weak. I finally turned to face him. The anger was beginning to burn through the shock, a hot, clean flame. "Then what is it like? Tell me. Explain it to me so I can understand why you would do this." He couldn't. He just stood there, a trapped animal. The confrontation I had imagined in my head, the screaming, the tears, didn't happen. Instead, it was a quiet, devastating dissection of our marriage. We spent the next 2 hours at that Thanksgiving table, the food growing cold between us, picking apart the seams of our life together. He talked about feeling stagnant, about the excitement Jessica brought. I listened, numb, realizing the man I loved had become a stranger with familiar hands. That night, he slept on the couch. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, the space beside me a vast, cold emptiness. The city lights painted shifting patterns on the wall. I replayed every moment of the last 6 months, every missed call, every vague excuse, every time he turned away from me in bed. The clues were everywhere, a trail of breadcrumbs I'd been too trusting, too blind to follow. The next morning, I called the family I worked for, the Wagners, and told them I had a family emergency and wouldn't be able to come in for the rest of the week. Mrs. Wagner's voice was full of concern, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. I just said I was sorry. Daniel left for work as if it were any other day, the silence between us heavier than any goodbye. After he was gone, the apartment felt like a tomb. I wandered from room to room, touching things, the photo of us on our wedding day, smiling and oblivious, the coffee mug he always used, the book on his nightstand. Every object was a relic from a dead civilization. The grief didn't hit me as a wave. It was a slow, creeping tide. It was in the way I automatically poured 2 cups of coffee before remembering. It was in the silence that was no longer comfortable but accusing. By the 3rd day, I couldn't stand it. The walls were closing in. The memory of his flinch was on a constant loop in my mind. I needed air. I needed to be somewhere that wasn't saturated with him. I put on my coat and walked aimlessly, my feet carrying me through the familiar streets of our neighborhood. I ended up outside a small storefront I'd passed 100 times but never entered. A local animal shelter. The sign in the window read, "Volunteers needed." Without thinking, I pushed the door open. The smell of antiseptic and animals hit me, a stark contrast to the perfumed lies of my home. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile looked up from a desk. "Can I help you?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. What was I doing here? I was Chloe, the nanny, the wife, but those identities felt like ill-fitting clothes. I looked past her, into a room where a dog was wagging its tail tentatively. I'd like to volunteer," I heard myself say. The words felt alien, but right. It was the first decision I'd made for myself, for my own survival, in a very long time. The divorce was not a battle. It was an erosion. There were no screaming matches over lawyers, no dramatic fights for assets we didn't have. Daniel moved out within a week, his departure as quiet and unceremonious as the death of our marriage. He took his tools, his clothes, and the large television. I got the apartment, the cat, and a silence so profound it had its own weight. The legal process was a slow, bureaucratic drip. We used a mediator, sitting across a polished table from each other, discussing the dissolution of 8 years as if it were a faulty business contract. Daniel was polite, distant. He agreed to everything I asked for, which was nothing more than what was legally mine. His acquiescence wasn't generosity. It was guilt, a desire to get this over with as quickly and painlessly as possible so he could return to his new, uncomplicated life with Jessica. I signed the papers with a hand that trembled only slightly, the finality of the stroke feeling less like a loss and more like the amputation of a gangrenous limb. The first month alone was the hardest. The apartment, once too small, now felt cavernous. Every corner echoed with absence. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard his key in the lock, only to be met with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sirens of New York. My life, which had revolved around the schedules of the Wagner children and the rhythm of Daniel's shifts, was now a vast, empty plain with no landmarks. My saving grace was the shelter. I started volunteering 3 times a week. It was physical, messy work, cleaning kennels, filling water bowls, walking anxious dogs. There was no room for self-pity when a terrified puppy was shivering in your arms. The animals didn't care about my broken heart. They responded to a gentle touch, a calm voice, a consistent presence. In their simple, unconditional need, I found a purpose that was entirely my own. It was a different kind of care than nannying. It was quieter, without the complex emotional negotiations of a family. It was pure. But coming home was always a crash back to reality. One evening, I found a box Daniel had left behind. It was filled with old photos, ticket stubs from concerts we'd attended, and a stack of birthday cards I'd given him. It was an archive of a life I no longer recognized. Sitting on the floor of my empty living room, surrounded by these ghosts, I felt the ground give way. The controlled numbness I'd maintained shattered. The grief I had been keeping at bay with chores and dog walks flooded in, a tidal wave of anger, betrayal, and a profound, terrifying loneliness. I didn't cry. I was past tears. The emotion was too big for that. It was a silent, screaming void inside my chest. I looked around the apartment, at the blank wall where the TV used to be, at the single coffee mug in the sink. This was my life. This was what remained. The feeling wasn't just sadness, it was a complete loss of identity. Who was I if I wasn't Daniel's wife? Who was I when I wasn't taking care of someone else's children or someone else's pets? I felt a desperate urge to talk, to scream my pain into the universe, but there was no one to call. My friends were coupled up. My family lived across the country. I was adrift on an island of my own making. Then I remembered the journal. Mrs. Wagner, the mother of the children I nanned, had given me a beautiful, leather-bound journal for my birthday last year. "For your thoughts," she'd said with a warm smile. A nanny has to hold so much in. Sometimes it helps to let it out. I'd never used it, thinking my thoughts weren't important enough to deserve such a nice book. I found it at the bottom of a drawer. That night, I poured a glass of wine, sat at my small kitchen table, and opened it to the first page. The blank, creamy paper was intimidating. What could I possibly write? I wasn't a writer. I was a nanny who got left. I put the pen to the paper and started with the only truth I had left. Today, the divorce was finalized. I am alone. The silence is so loud. Daniel is probably with her right now, in some clean, modern apartment that doesn't have any memories of me. I hate him. I hate that he gets to be happy while I sit here in the ruins of our life. I feel like I've disappeared. The words were clumsy, raw, and ugly. But as I wrote them, a strange thing happened. The screaming void in my chest seemed to quieten just a little. The pain was still there, but it was now outside of me, contained on the page. I kept writing. I wrote about the flinch. I wrote about the cold turkey. I wrote about the empty side of the bed. I wrote until my hand ached and the wine glass was empty. It didn't solve anything. It didn't bring him back. But it was the first time since the affair was discovered that I had truly done something for myself by myself. I had acknowledged my pain without judgment. I had given it a voice. That night, for the first time in months, I slept through the night. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the window, and the journal was sitting on the table, a silent witness to my survival. The lowest point had passed. I had found a way to build a raft, and now I had to learn how to sail. The journal became my anchor. Every night I would write. Some days it was just a sentence. Today I cried in the laundry room. Other days it was pages of tangled, angry thoughts. But the act itself was a ritual, a way of processing the toxic waste of my marriage. It was in those pages that I admitted the deepest shame, that a part of me still missed him. Not the man who had lied to me, but the ghost of the man I'd married, the one who would bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. But writing was passive. It was about looking inward, and while necessary, I felt my world shrinking to the size of my apartment and the shelter. My body, which had always been strong from chasing after toddlers and carrying grocery bags up 5 flights of stairs, now felt heavy with grief. I was tired all the time. I knew I needed to move, to do something that would force me out of my head and into my body. Something that was the absolute antithesis of my old life. That's when I saw the flyer taped to a lamppost near my building. A simple, stark design, a silhouette of a person clinging to a vertical rock face. Vertical Solutions, it read. Indoor rock climbing, first session free. Rock climbing. It seemed absurd. I was a nanny, not an athlete. The most daring thing I did was cross the street against the light. But the image called to me. The sheer, vertical challenge of it. The requirement of complete focus. There would be no room for thoughts of Daniel, of Jessica, of my empty apartment, when my entire being was concentrated on finding the next hold, on trusting my own strength to keep me from falling. A week later, I stood in the cavernous gym, the air smelling of chalk and sweat. The walls were a grotesque and beautiful mosaic of colored grips, stretching up towards the high ceiling. All around me, people moved with a graceful, practiced ease, their bodies speaking a language of strength and precision I didn't understand. I felt like an imposter in my old yoga pants and a t-shirt. The instructor, a wiry woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake, fitted me with a harness. The first rule, she said, clipping a rope to the front, is to trust the gear. The second rule is to trust your belayer. The third rule is to breathe. Most beginners forget to breathe. My first attempt was a clumsy, humiliating failure. My arms trembled, my feet slipped. I barely made it 6 feet off the ground before my muscles screamed, and I had to let go, swinging gently in the harness. The distance to the floor felt terrifyingly vast. Failure, just like my marriage. But as I dangled there, catching my breath, I looked up. The wall was still there. The holds were still there. The instructor's voice was calm from below. Okay, Chloe, feet on the wall. Let's try again. Look for the next hold. Just the next one. Don't look at the top. Just the next hold. The phrase echoed in my mind. Isn't that what I was doing in life? Not looking at the impossible summit of being healed or being happy again, but just finding the next hold, getting through the next hour, the next day. I pushed off the wall, found my footing, and reached up. My fingers found a small, rough grip. I pulled, my body obeyed. I found another hold for my foot. It became a rhythm. Reach, grip, pull, breathe. The world narrowed to the texture of the plastic under my fingers, the strain in my lat muscles, the sound of my own breathing. There was no past, no future. Only the present, physical challenge. I didn't reach the top that day, but I got higher than I had before. And when I finally let go and rappelled down, my body was thrumming with a new kind of exhaustion. It wasn't the heavy fatigue of grief. It was the clean, honest weariness of effort. I went back the next week, and the week after. It became my new addiction. The wall was a brutal, honest partner. It didn't care about my feelings. It only responded to my technique, my strength, my courage. I learned to read the routes, to see sequences where before I'd only seen a chaotic jumble. I learned to fall, to trust that the rope and the system would catch me. Each fall was a lesson, not a failure. One evening, I was attempting a particularly difficult route, a steep overhang that required a dynamic, committing move. My arms were burning. The old voice of doubt whispered in my ear, "You can't do this. You're not strong enough, you're going to fall." For a second, I froze. I saw Daniel's face, his flinch. I felt the old fear of not being enough. Then I heard the instructor's voice, faint but clear. "Breathe, Chloe, commit to the move. You are stronger than you think." I took a deep breath. I stopped looking down. I stopped looking back. I focused only on the hold just beyond my fingertips. With a grunt of effort, I pushed off with my legs and lunged. My hand slapped against the plastic, and my fingers closed around it. I'd done it. Hanging there, catching my breath, a wave of pure, unadulterated exhilaration washed over me. It was the first true joy I'd felt in over a year. It wasn't given to me by anyone else. I had earned it. I had built this strength, this trust in myself, with my own two hands. Climbing didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a new way to relate to it. The wall taught me that progress wasn't linear. Some days I felt weak and clumsy. Other days, I felt like I could fly. But every time I touched the wall, I was choosing to move forward, one grip at a time. I was learning that the only way to overcome the fear of falling was to fall, and to learn that I could get back on the wall again. I was no longer the woman who had been left. I was becoming a woman who could climb. The rhythm of my life had changed. The frantic, grief-stricken tempo of the first few months had given way to something slower, more deliberate. My days were no longer defined by the absence of Daniel, but by the presence of my own choices. The journaling continued, but the entries had evolved. They were less about dissecting the past and more about documenting the present. I wrote about the burn in my muscles after a long climb, the funny thing the Wagner's youngest child said, the quiet satisfaction of a clean kennel at the shelter. Rock climbing ceased to be a novelty and became a non-negotiable part of my week, as routine as grocery shopping. Tuesdays and Thursdays were for the climbing gym. Saturdays, if the weather was good, I'd join a small group of climbers who ventured out to the real rock faces in the Hudson Valley. The first time I stood at the base of a genuine cliff, the wind whipping my hair, the scale of it was terrifying. The plastic holds of the gym were predictable. This was ancient, rough, and unforgiving. But I'd learned to translate the skills. I'd learned to breathe. My body was transforming. The softness that had come from years of comfortable marriage was being carved away, replaced by lean muscle. I could see the definition in my arms, feel the power in my core. But the physical change was secondary to the mental one. The wall was a merciless teacher of patience and problem-solving. There were roots that seemed impossible at first glance, a sheer face with tiny, crimpy holds. The old me would have looked at it and walked away. The new me would sit on the mat, staring up, tracing a possible path with my eyes. I'd watch others attempt it, learning from their failures and successes. Then I'd tie in and try. Failure was no longer a condemnation, it was data. Each fall taught me something. My grip strength was weak. My footwork was sloppy. I wasn't committing to the dynamic moves. I started training with purpose. I spent hours on the training board, my fingers aching, building the specific strength I needed. I watched videos on technique. I became a student of my own body. One rainy Thursday evening, the gym was nearly empty. I was working on a route graded 5.10A, a significant step up from my usual climbs. It had a crux, a difficult sequence right in the middle that had defeated me a dozen times. I'd fall at the same spot, swinging out into space, frustrated and breathless. That night, something was different. I felt calm. I chalked my hands methodically, my mind clear. I tied my own figure eight not without thinking, a ritual that had become as natural as breathing. I started the climb, moving smoothly through the familiar initial holds. My breathing was even. I reached the crux. The holds were small, the spacing awkward. I could feel the familiar panic start to rise, the voice that said, "You're going to fall." But then another voice, my own now, answered. "Breathe, find the position, trust your feet." I adjusted my hips, smearing the sole of my climbing shoe against the smooth wall for friction. I looked up, not at the distant top, but at the next specific hold, a small, in-cut edge. I exhaled, and in that moment of empty lungs, I made the move. It wasn't a frantic lunge, it was a precise, controlled extension. My fingers found the edge. I held on. A surge of adrenaline, clean and sharp, shot through me. I'd passed the crux. The rest of the route was a blur of focused movement. When I finally slapped the top of the wall, a sound escaped my lips, not a shout, but a deep, guttural yes that echoed in the quiet gym. I leaned back on the rope, letting my belayer lower me down. I was grinning, my heart pounding not from fear, but from triumph. As my feet touched the soft mat, I looked up at the root. I had conquered it. Not through luck, but through perseverance, through learning, through building my own strength. It was a victory that belonged entirely to me. No one could take it away. It wasn't about Daniel, or the affair, or the divorce. It was about me and the wall. That was the moment the activity truly became a habit, a part of my identity. I wasn't just Chloe who climbed to forget. I was a climber. The discipline gave structure to my grief, and the mastery gave me a new kind of confidence. I started to carry that confidence outside the gym. I spoke with more assurance at the shelter, suggesting new training methods for the dogs. I even negotiated a small raise with the Wagners, something the old me would have been too anxious to do. The pain of the past was still there, a faint scar, but it no longer dictated my present. I was building a life, hold by hold, and for the first time, the future didn't look like an empty space. It looked like a beautiful, challenging route, and I was finally learning how to read the map. The happiness snuck up on me. It didn't arrive with a fanfare or a dramatic declaration. It was a quiet accumulation, like the first light of dawn gradually filling a room. I'd been so focused on the process of healing, the climbing, the journaling, the shelter work, that I hadn't noticed the destination I was slowly approaching. A state of being genuinely, peacefully okay on my own. It manifested in small ways. A Saturday morning spent entirely for myself. No frantic cleaning to fill the silence, no obligatory scrolling through social media to see what coupled-up friends were doing. I would make a single cup of coffee, sit by the window in my apartment, and just watch the city wake up. The silence was no longer an enemy, it was a companion. It was the space where I could hear my own thoughts, and I found, to my surprise, that I liked the company. I'd gone to the Wagners for little Liam's 5th birthday party. It was a chaotic, joyful affair, full of screaming children and indulgent parents. A year ago, the sight of this happy, intact family would have felt like a physical blow, a reminder of everything I had lost and might never have. But that day, I felt differently. I played with the kids, laughed with Mrs. Wagner, and ate a slice of ridiculously blue cake. And when I left, hugging them goodbye, I felt a warm fondness, but no aching emptiness. I drove home to my quiet apartment and felt not loneliness, but a pleasant tiredness and the simple pleasure of taking off my shoes and putting on soft sweatpants. My life had a fullness that was entirely my own creation. My shelves were no longer filled with compromises, his action movie DVDs next to my romantic comedies. Now, they held my climbing gear, a growing collection of novels I actually wanted to read, and a small, thriving succulent I hadn't managed to kill. The space was mine, curated by my tastes, my needs. One evening, I decided to cook a proper meal for myself. For so long, cooking for one had felt pathetic, a reminder of my solitary state. I'd existed on salads and toast. But that night, I put on some music, not the sad ballads I'd wallowed in, but an upbeat playlist I'd made for climbing. I chopped vegetables, seared a piece of salmon, and made a risotto, something I'd always thought was too fussy for a weeknight. I set the table for one with a placemat and a cloth napkin. I lit a candle. As I sat down to eat, I looked around my apartment. The evening sun cast a golden glow across the floor. My climbing rope was coiled neatly in a corner. My journal lay open on the coffee table. There was no one to talk to, no one to share the food with, and it was perfect. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of contentment. This wasn't a life of waiting for someone to complete it. This was a complete life. I was whole, all by myself. The realization was liberating. The pressure was off. I wasn't looking for someone to rescue me from my solitude because my solitude was no longer a prison. It was a sanctuary. If I ever met someone again, it wouldn't be because I needed him, but because I wanted him. He would have to be an addition to this life I had fought so hard to build, not a foundation for it. I finished my dinner, washed the dishes while singing along to the music, and felt a deep, steady joy. The ghost of Daniel had finally left the building. The apartment, the city, my life, it all felt light again, unburdened. I had not just survived the storm. I had learned to dance in the rain, and found I quite liked the feeling of being clean-washed and alone under a wide-open sky. The next chapter of my life was no longer a question mark. It was a blank page, and for the first time I was excited to see what I would write on it, knowing that whatever it was, it would be my story, told in my voice. The idea of a solo hiking trip had been born from my newfound confidence. It was an extension of the climbing, a way to take the peace I'd found on the indoor walls out into the vastness of nature. I'd booked a weekend guided hike in the Adirondacks, a moderate to challenging loop that promised stunning fall foliage. It felt like a pilgrimage, a test of the person I had become. The morning of the hike was crisp and clear, the air smelling of pine and damp earth. A small group of us gathered at the trailhead, a few couples, a trio of friends, and me. Our guide was a man named Alex. He was tall and lean, with the quiet, capable demeanor of someone who spent more time with trees than people. His voice was calm as he went over the safety procedures, his eyes scanning our group with a practiced ease. He wasn't overly cheerful or talkative, he was simply present, a steady anchor in the excitement of the group. We started up the trail. The forest was an explosion of color, reds and golds against a brilliant blue sky. I fell into a rhythm, my breathing matching the pace of my steps. I was content to be at the back of the group, soaking in the solitude within the company of others. For the first hour, Alex moved among the hikers, checking in, pointing out a peculiar mushroom or a bird's nest. When he reached me, he simply nodded, a small, acknowledging smile. "Doing okay back here?" "More than okay," I said and meant it. "It's beautiful." "It is," he agreed, his gaze sweeping over the canopy before returning to me. "You're a steady hiker. Not many people are comfortable with their own pace." It was a simple observation, but it felt seen. He didn't try to make small talk, he just walked beside me for a few minutes in a comfortable silence that felt more like companionship than awkwardness. I noticed things about him, the way he patiently helped an older hiker navigate a rocky section, the quiet respect in his voice when he talked about the trail, the absence of any performative masculinity. He was just solid. The trail narrowed and began a steep ascent alongside a rushing creek. The sound of the water was deafening, a roaring symphony that drowned out all other noise. We had to cross the creek on a series of slippery, moss-covered stones. The group ahead navigated it with varying degrees of grace. When it was my turn, I focused, channeling the balance I'd learned from climbing. I was halfway across when my foot slipped on a wet stone. My arms flailed, and for a heart-stopping second, I was sure I was going to plunge into the icy water. A hand shot out, firm and sure, grabbing my forearm. It was Alex. He hadn't been hovering, he'd just been there, watching. He didn't pull me dramatically to safety. He just provided a stable point of contact, his grip strong and reassuring. "Easy does it," he said, his voice calm even over the roar of the water. "Take your time. You've got it." With that simple anchor, I regained my balance. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from the sudden, startling warmth of his touch. I found my footing and carefully hopped to the other bank. He released my arm once I was steady. "Thanks," I said, a little breathless. "No problem," he replied. "The moss here is treacherous. You handled it well." His praise was matter-of-fact, not condescending. He looked at me, and for a moment, his calm eyes held mine, and I saw something in them. Not pity, not a pickup line, but a genuine, quiet recognition. Then he turned to ensure the next hiker made it across safely. The rest of the hike passed in a bit of a daze for me. I watched him. I watched how he effortlessly built a small cairn to better mark a confusing turn in the trail. I watched how he shared his water with a hiker who'd run out. At the summit, as we all stood breathless, looking out at a sea of fiery-colored peaks, I found myself standing near him. "Quite a view," I said, feeling uncharacteristically shy. "It never gets old," he said, his profile outlined against the sky. He glanced at me. "It's different every time, like it's showing you what you need to see." The comment was so unexpected, so introspective, that it caught me off guard. This wasn't a trail guide reciting a script. This was a man who had a deep, personal relationship with this place. On the descent, we fell into step together again. The conversation was easy, flowing from the names of trees to our favorite spots in the city. He told me he was a building superintendent for a few properties in Brooklyn, which explained his practical, capable hands. He liked fixing things, making broken things whole again. I told him I was a nanny, and instead of the usual, "Oh, that must be fun," he said, "that's important work. Takes a lot of patience." Then, as we talked about our weekends, he mentioned, almost as an aside, that he volunteered at an animal shelter every Sunday. "The one on Bergen Street," he said. "I just like being around the dogs. They don't ask for much, just a walk and a kind word." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The animal shelter, my shelter. The place that had been my sanctuary. I didn't tell him I volunteered there too. The coincidence felt too large, too significant to reveal in that moment. It felt like a secret sign, a thread connecting my past struggle to this present possibility. When we reached the trailhead, the group dispersed with cheerful goodbyes. I lingered, pretending to adjust my backpack. Alex was packing up the guide equipment. "Well," I said, my heart thumping in my chest, this was new. This was me taking a risk for something I wanted, not something I needed. "Thanks for the great hike, and for the save at the creek." He smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. "My pleasure, Chloe. You're a natural out here." There was a pause. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows. I took a breath, committing to the move. "I was wondering," I said, my voice thankfully steady, "if you're not busy, maybe you'd like to get a coffee sometime. There's a place near my apartment that has surprisingly good scones." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of surprise in his calm demeanor, followed by what looked like genuine pleasure. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that a lot." He gave me his number. As I drove back to the city, the autumn colors blazing around me, I didn't feel the frantic excitement of a crush. I felt a deep, steady warmth. It wasn't about being rescued from loneliness. It was the simple, profound joy of having met someone who felt like a natural next step on a trail I was already happily walking. Our first date was not a dinner at a loud, trendy restaurant. It was a Saturday morning hike in a state park just north of the city, his suggestion. It felt right. It was neutral territory, a space where we had already established a comfortable dynamic. I arrived first, my breath misting in the chilly air, a new, slightly too crisp map clutched in my hand. I saw his car pull into the lot, and a flutter of nerves, the good kind, danced in my stomach. He got out, wearing a well-worn fleece and a genuine smile. "Hey, you found it." "Barely," I laughed, holding up the map. "I think this thing was folded by a vengeful cartographer." He chuckled, a warm, easy sound. "Here, let me see." He took the map, his fingers brushing mine. There was no flinch, no tension, just a simple, warm contact. He spent a minute wrestling with the stubborn paper, his brow furrowed in mock concentration. Instead of getting frustrated, he just smiled. "Okay, this is a lost cause, but I know this trail like the back of my hand. Think you can trust a guide who works for scones?" "I suppose I'll have to," I said, feeling a grin spread across my face. We started walking. The conversation from the first hike picked up right where it left off, but it was deeper now, more personal. We talked about our lives, the real stuff. I told him about the divorce, not with the raw pain of before, but as a fact of my history, a chapter that had ended. I told him about climbing, about the shelter. He listened, truly listened, his eyes never leaving my face. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix it. He just nodded, absorbing my story, and he shared his. He talked about his work as a super, the satisfaction of fixing a leaky faucet or restoring an old banister. He talked about his family, his love for his niece and nephew, and he talked about the shelter. "It's my church," he said simply. "No sermons, just unconditional love. It grounds me." I finally told him then that I volunteered there too, on Wednesdays. He stopped walking and looked at me, his expression one of delighted amazement. "You're kidding, the scruffy terrier mix, Buster, the one who loves peanut butter." "That's my walking buddy," I exclaimed. The coincidence was no longer startling, it was affirming. It felt like our lives had been orbiting the same center of gravity for a while, destined to cross paths. The trail narrowed, and we walked single file for a while. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sounds of the forest and our own breathing. I watched the way he moved through the world, with a quiet assurance, with patience. When we reached a confusing junction, he didn't consult the useless map. He just paused, looked at the sun, the lay of the land, and said, "This way." He was never arrogant, just certain. It was incredibly attractive. We found a flat rock overlooking a valley to eat the sandwiches we'd brought. The sun was warm on our faces. As we talked, I saw his patience in action. A group of loud teenagers passed us, their music blaring. I tensed, expecting annoyance, but Alex just watched them pass with a faint smile. "Ah, to have that much energy," he'd said, and the tension melted away. Later, I tripped on a root, stumbling forward. His hand was on my elbow in an instant, steadying me. "I've got you," he said, his voice calm. It was the same tone he'd used at the creek. It wasn't a dramatic rescue. It was just a simple, reliable presence. "I've got you." The words resonated deep within me. They weren't a promise to carry my burdens, but an assurance that I wouldn't have to face stumbles alone. This was so different from the fiery, sometimes volatile passion I'd had with Daniel. This was quieter, steadier. It felt like coming home to a warm, well-lit house after years of living in a drafty, uncertain space. With Alex, I didn't feel the need to perform or be anyone other than myself. The woman I had worked so hard to become, the climber, the volunteer, the contented single woman, was exactly the woman he seemed to see and appreciate. As we walked back to the cars, the afternoon light turning to gold, he reached out and took my hand. His hand was warm and rough from work, and it enveloped mine perfectly. It wasn't a question or a demand, it was just a connection. We walked like that for the last half-mile, not needing to speak. When we reached the parking lot, there was no awkwardness about the end of the date. "The scones are still on the table," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "But I have to warn you, I'm a tough critic." "I'm sure you are," I laughed. "Next Saturday?" "Next Saturday," he agreed. He leaned in and kissed my cheek, a soft, lingering press of his lips that sent a shiver of pure warmth through my whole body. It was respectful, sweet, and full of promise. Driving home, I felt a joy that was expansive and calm. This wasn't a distraction from my happiness, it was an extension of it. Meeting Alex felt less like starting a new book and more like turning a page in the one I was already enjoying, discovering that the next chapter was even better than I could have imagined. The following months were a gentle, joyful blur. My life, which had once felt so compartmentalized, the nanny job, the shelter, the climbing gym, began to seamlessly integrate with Alex. It wasn't a dramatic merging of two worlds, but a natural, easy blending, like two streams joining to form a wider, deeper river. Our Saturdays became sacred. Sometimes we'd hike, and the poorly folded map became a running joke. I'd deliberately fold it wrong just to see him laugh and patiently smooth it out on the hood of his car, his large hands carefully creasing the paper into something functional. Other times, we'd explore the city with the same sense of adventure, visiting every coffee shop in a neighborhood until we found our favorite, or spending a rainy afternoon browsing a flea market, not looking for anything in particular, but delighting in the discoveries. It was in these ordinary moments that I truly saw the man he was. His patience wasn't just a trait, it was his way of moving through the world. When I nervously attempted to cook him dinner and nearly set off the smoke alarm, he didn't panic or take over. He simply opened a window, waved a towel at the detector with a calm smile and said, "Well, the carbonara is smoked. I like smoked." We ended up ordering pizza, eating it on the floor of my apartment, and laughing until our sides hurt. One Sunday, we volunteered at the shelter together. It was the final, beautiful stitch sewing our worlds together. Seeing him with the animals confirmed everything I felt. He wasn't just a guy who showed up. He had a quiet, intuitive connection with the most fearful dogs. He would sit with them for hours, not forcing interaction, just offering a steady, silent presence. Watching him gently coax a shivering greyhound to take a treat from his hand. His voice a low, reassuring murmur, filled me with a love so profound it was almost overwhelming. It was after one of these shelter days, driving back to the city with a contented tiredness, that we started talking about the future. Not in a pressured way, but in a dreamy, what-if kind of way. "I love New York," I said, looking out at the skyline, "but sometimes I miss quiet, real quiet." Alex glanced over at me. "I know what you mean. My lease is up on my place in a few months. The super's apartment is practical. But it's not a home." There was a pause, filled with the hum of the tires on the pavement. Then he said, his voice casual but his knuckles tightening slightly on the steering wheel. I've always dreamed of a place with a bit of land. Not a lot. Just enough for a dog to run, maybe a view of some trees, a mountain cabin, something like that. My breath caught. A mountain cabin. The words resonated deep within me, echoing the secret longing I'd only ever written about in my journal. It was as if he had reached into my mind and pulled out my own unspoken dream. A cabin, I repeated softly, where you can hear the wind in the pines and nothing else. He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. Exactly. No traffic, no neighbors through the wall, just peace. We spent the rest of the drive weaving a shared fantasy. It started as a joke, a tiny, crumbling shack with a leaky roof, but as we talked, it took shape, becoming more real. We debated the merits of a wood-burning stove versus a fireplace. We argued playfully about who would get the bigger closet. We imagined a porch with 2 rocking chairs and a garden where we could grow our own vegetables. The conversation wasn't a proposal or a concrete plan. It was more important than that. It was the creation of a shared vision, a North Star for us. It was a future built not on the ashes of my past, but on the solid foundation we were building together in the present. We weren't running away from the city. We were moving towards a life that reflected who we were together. Quieter, more grounded, connected to nature. That night, as we lay in my bed, the city lights painting familiar patterns on the ceiling, I felt a sense of rightness so complete it was almost dizzying. My hand was in his, our fingers laced together. His breathing was slow and even. This was it. This was what I had been unknowingly waiting for. Not a knight in shining armor, but a partner. A man who was patient enough to steady me when I stumbled, calm enough to laugh in the face of a little smoke, and whose dreams for the future aligned so perfectly with my own that it felt less like a coincidence and more like fate. The ghost of my old life was gone, not banished by force, but simply outshone by the bright, steady light of this new one. We were building something, piece by piece, and the blueprint was a simple, beautiful sketch of a cabin in the woods, a place we would one day call our own. The dream we sketched in the car that day didn't stay a dream for long. It became a project, a shared mission that filled our weekends with a purpose even more exhilarating than climbing a new route. We spent months looking at listings online, driving upstate on Sundays to visit properties that were always too big, too small, or too expensive. But we were in no rush. The search itself was part of the adventure, another thing we were doing together. Then we found it. Tucked away on a wooded hillside in the Catskills, a modest A-frame cabin with a rusted metal roof and a porch that looked out over a valley. It wasn't perfect. It needed work, a lot of it. The floors slanted slightly, the kitchen was from the 1970s, and there was a family of squirrels living in the attic. But the moment we stepped inside, we felt it. The peace. The potential. This wasn't just a house, it was a blank canvas for our life. The day we got the keys was one of the happiest of my life. We didn't have a moving truck filled with new furniture. We had Alex's pickup truck, loaded with our combined belongings. My books and climbing gear, his tools, and a few pieces of furniture we'd refinished together. We spent our first night there on a mattress on the floor, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind in the pines and the absolute, breathtaking silence. He held me close, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was home. The cabin became our masterpiece. Alex's skill with his hands transformed it. He fixed the roof, laid new floors, and built custom bookshelves. I painted walls, sewed curtains, and designed a kitchen garden. We learned together, making mistakes and laughing about them. We argued over paint colors and then made up over a bottle of wine on the porch. We were building more than a house, we were building a partnership. And then, a new, miraculous chapter began. I found out I was pregnant. The news was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The fear was old, a ghost from my past life. What if I'm not enough? What if I fail? But Alex's calm patience was my anchor. When I told him, his eyes filled with tears of joy, and he held me so tightly I thought I might break. "We're going to be a family," he whispered, and the words, which had once felt like a threat, now felt like a promise. Our daughter, Maya, was born on a crisp autumn morning, the same time of year we'd met. Holding her for the first time, I felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it erased every trace of the old pain. The long, lonely nights in my New York apartment, the feeling of being broken, It all melted away in the face of this tiny, perfect human. Alex was a natural father. His patience, which had steadied me on a hiking trail and soothed frightened dogs, was now poured onto our child. He could rock her for hours, his deep voice humming a lullaby, his calm presence a balm to her newborn cries. This morning, 3 years later, I'm standing at the kitchen window, watching them. The sky is just beginning to lighten, painting the valley in shades of rose and gold. Alex is on the porch, holding a sippy cup of milk, and Maya is toddling around his legs, pointing at a bird feeder and babbling excitedly. He kneels down to her level, listening intently to her incomprehensible story, his face a mask of serious attention. He nods, says something I can't hear, and she laughs, a sound so pure it seems to ring in the clear mountain air. I think back to that Thanksgiving, to the cold turkey and the colder silence, to the woman I was, so small, so defined by her loss. I barely recognize her now. The journey from there to here wasn't a straight line. It was a climb, with falls and cruxes and moments of sheer terror. But every hold I grabbed, every difficult move I made, led me to this summit, to this porch, to this man and this child. Alex catches my eye through the window and smiles. He says something to Maya, and she turns, her little face breaking into a grin when she sees me. She waddles towards the door, her arms outstretched. "Mama!" I open the door and scoop her up, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. Alex wraps his arms around both of us, his chin resting on my head. We stand there for a long moment, a family of 3, watching the sun rise over the mountains we now call home. "Adventure today?" Alex asks, his voice rumbling against my back. Maya claps her hands. "Map, map!" He pulls a familiar, poorly folded map from his back pocket, the same one from our first date, now soft and creased with love. We're going on a hike, just a short one to a nearby stream. It's our favorite family activity. We'll let Maya lead the way, her tiny hand trustingly tucked in ours. We'll probably get a little lost. We'll definitely laugh. And we'll come home to our cabin, to the life we built from the ground up. This is my happy ending, but it doesn't feel like an ending at all. It feels like a beautiful, ongoing beginning. I am no longer the woman who was betrayed. I am a mother, a partner, a climber, a nurturer. I am whole. And as I look at my daughter's bright, curious eyes and my husband's steady, loving gaze, I know that the greatest adventure is still ahead. The morning of Maya's 5th birthday dawns with a crispness that promises a perfect autumn day. I'm the first one awake, as always. I slip out from under the warm quilts, careful not to disturb Alex, whose arm is thrown possessively across my waist even in sleep. I pause for a moment, just watching them, my husband, my daughter, tangled together in the soft light filtering through the pine trees outside our bedroom window. Maya's small form is a gentle rise and fall against his chest, her dark hair fanned out on the pillow. This sight, this simple, everyday miracle, still has the power to catch my breath. I pad quietly into the main room of our cabin. The space is filled with the evidence of our life. Photos on the wall. Our wedding day, a small ceremony right here on this land. Maya as a newborn, red-faced and squalling. The 3 of us on a hiking trail, Alex carrying her on his shoulders. My climbing gear is neatly stored in a corner, now used for weekend trips with Alex while Maya spends the day with her grandparents. The journal I once filled with anguish sits on a bookshelf, its pages full now of grocery lists, gardening notes, and Maya's first words. Today, however, the room is also filled with the secret, joyful chaos of birthday preparations. Streamers I'd hung after she fell asleep last night crisscross the ceiling. A pile of presents, wrapped in colorful paper, waits by the stone fireplace. The cake I baked, a slightly lopsided chocolate masterpiece decorated with a forest of candy animals, is hidden in the pantry. As I start the coffee, my mind drifts back, not with pain, but with a strange sense of gratitude. It's been over a decade since that Thanksgiving. The sharp edges of the betrayal have long since softened, worn smooth by time and the relentless, beautiful demands of this new life. I don't think of Daniel often, but when I do, it's without bitterness. He was a chapter, a difficult, painful one, but a chapter that had to be written to get me here. His betrayal wasn't a gift, but my survival was. My transformation was. The sound of little feet pattering on the wooden floor interrupts my thoughts. Maya appears in the doorway, her favorite stuffed fox clutched in one hand, her eyes wide with birthday excitement. "Mama." Is it my birthday now? For real? I sweep her up into my arms, breathing in her little girl smell of sleep and sweetness. For real, my love, happy birthday. Soon, the cabin is filled with noise and laughter. Alex, now awake, makes his famous pancake breakfast while Maya helps, which mostly involves enthusiastically stirring a bowl of batter and getting more of it on herself than in the pan. The morning is a whirlwind of opening presents. A tiny climbing harness from us, a set of watercolors from her grandparents, a picture book about foxes from the Wagners, who are still a cherished part of our lives. The main event is the hike. It's a tradition. Every year on Maya's birthday, we take her on the trail that leads to the waterfall, the same trail Alex and I hiked on one of our first dates. We pack a picnic lunch, and Maya leads the way, her small backpack bouncing, her confidence on the path a testament to a childhood spent in these woods. "I'm the guide today," she announces, holding up a map that is, in the finest family tradition, hopelessly folded. "We're in good hands," Alex says, winking at me. His hair is graying at the temples now, but his eyes are as calm and kind as the day I met him. He takes my hand as we walk, his thumb stroking my palm. We don't speak much. We don't need to. Our communication is in these touches, in the shared glances as we watch our daughter discover the world. At the waterfall, we spread out the blanket. The air is cool and misty from the spray. Maya scrambles over the rocks at the water's edge, her laughter echoing mine. Alex unpacks the lunch, and for a moment, I'm struck by the sheer, overwhelming perfection of it all. This is the family I'd been taught to fear I'd never have. This is the love I thought I'd lost forever. As Maya naps on the blanket, exhausted from her adventures, her head in my lap, Alex sits beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "You're quiet," he murmurs, his lips against my hair. "I'm just happy," I say, and the word feels too small for the ocean of contentment inside me. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." He follows my gaze to our sleeping daughter. "I know," he says simply. He understands. He knows my whole story, the broken pieces, and the beautiful mosaic we built from them. He never tried to erase my past. He just helped me build a future so bright it outshone the shadows. That evening, after cake and stories, and tucking a very tired 5-year-old into bed, Alex and I sit on the porch in our rocking chairs, wrapped in a shared blanket. The sky is a vast canopy of stars, impossibly clear away from the city lights. The only sound is the crackle of the fireplace inside and the gentle rustle of the night. "I was thinking," Alex says, breaking the comfortable silence, "maybe next spring we could build that treehouse for Maya, the one she's been drawing." I look at him, at the profile I know as well as my own, and my heart swells with a love that is as steady and constant as the mountains around us. This is it. This is the happy ending, but it's not an ending at all. It's a continuous, evolving story. There will be more birthdays, more hikes, more treehouses to build. There will be challenges, too, because that's life. But we will face them together, with patience and with calm. "I think that's a perfect idea," I say, reaching for his hand. "I am Chloe. I was a nanny who loved a man who broke her heart. I became a climber who learned to trust her own strength. I am a wife to a man who fixes things with his hands and builds dreams with his heart. I am a mother to a little girl who falls asleep to the sound of the wind in the pines. My story is not about a betrayal. It is about a rebirth. It is a testament to the fact that sometimes, the most beautiful families are not the ones you are born into, but the ones you build, piece by piece, with patience, with courage, and with an unshakable belief that after the longest winter, a glorious spring will always come."